Okay, so continuing on with with Napoleon's state here. Now we were just talking about education, which obviously can be seen as a good thing, but we also see some elements of Napoleon's reign that kind of resemble some similar things to the Reign of Terror. So Napoleon is very much trying everything he can to maintain his own power, especially because at this point he's consul, right? He's first consul, which means there are actually two others. So he's not like the only person who has power, but he really is kind of assuming dictatorial authority here in a way, which is only solidified when he crowns himself emperor. But in order to make sure that there are no challenges to his rule, he also sets up a police state. So what he's doing is he's keeping tons of citizens, thousands of citizens, actually, under continuous surveillance. So kind of like the Reign of Terror. Anyone who speaks against Napoleon could end up in prison. All right. So after 1810 or so, political suspects were held in state prisons, just like they had been during the Reign of Terror. All right. And you're going to see that by 1814 or so, you have 2,500 people held in prison for political reasons. Um, Napoleon's also going to do anything he can to put down any opposition to him. So you're going to see, just like in the French Revolution again, or just like previously during the Reign of Terror, um, there were people who opposed the government, especially in regions far away from Paris. Again, you have people in the Vendée, as well as Brittany, who are trying to organize an opposition in the form of kind of a guerrilla organization. They're going to be put down by Napoleon because they pose a huge threat. You're also going to see one of the most notorious actions of Napoleon is he arrests and executes a Bourbon in 1804. This guy's named the Duke of Enghien, but you don't really have to worry about his name so much as the fact that he's a Bourbon. And remember that the Bourbons were all the Louis were Bourbons, right? And so basically, he executes this guy because there was a rumor that there was that he was engaged in a plot against Napoleon, and since he was a Bourbon, he could potentially become king. But eventually, after he was killed, there was no evidence that turned up that this Duke of Enghien was involved in any plot. And it also shows European public opinion starts to definitely start to turn against Napoleon at this point because they feel like he's using way too much force in order to maintain his rule. All right, so there's some drawbacks with Napoleon's reforms. All right, we already talked about some of the inequality for women. That's in the previous video here. We're also going to see that for the working class, they don't really experience as many benefits. All right, so again, even though it was supposedly a meritocracy, if you were in a wealthier position, you were likely to benefit more from Napoleon's rule. Napoleon gave out more titles to people of wealth. So if you were in the working class, you definitely suffered because you still couldn't form trade unions. You're also going to see that under Napoleon, he represses liberty, he subverts republicanism, and he restores absolutism in France by creating that police state. All right, so even though at first Napoleon, he's seen as a child of the revolution, he's seen as an enlightened despot, so to speak, in order to maintain his rule, he's going to repress people who oppose him. So it's the exact opposite of liberty, and it's definitely not Republican. All right, he's also very nepotistic. All right, we're going to talk about this in a little while, in more detail. But we're going to see that when he conquers other nations during his wars, he places his relatives on the throne. So basically, and he gives them, if their name, he puts Napoleon in their name, right? So like basically, anywhere you look, you have a Napoleon on the throne, right? Not just in France. Okay, this map, we're going to have a more zoomed in map in a little while, but this shows you kind of the extent of Napoleon's acquisitions, everything in red here. Spain is not red, just so that you know. Okay, so again, we are at war just like we were during the French Revolution, okay? These wars are very short and distinct for the most part. Realize that at this point, Britain is the only country that's continuously at war with France during this time. You do have some of the other countries that were at war earlier in the revolution. Remember the first coalition, right? Some of these countries will be at war with France occasionally, but it is only Britain that's constantly at war with France. Okay, the other four great powers, so to speak, are sometimes at war with France, all right? So, well, the other four are Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Britain is the fourth. All right, by 1813, though, they are going to be fighting France simultaneously. All right, and so you might ask, okay, why are Austria and Prussia and Russia not at war with France at certain periods during this time? Well, sometimes they're actually willing to ally with Napoleon because it benefits them. So you're going to see why eventually they may break away from Napoleon and decide to fight against him. All right. So basically, you're going to see that it's when Napoleon conquers Italy that these other countries say that Napoleon needs to be defeated to make Europe peaceful again. So prior to that, they actually want to be kind of friendly with Napoleon, partly for economic reasons. Okay, so the War of the Second Coalition is the next war we need to know. Okay, so again, a coalition, just in case I wasn't clear about that before, it's in this instance the group of countries, and they are all against France in this example. All right, so this second coalition, we're going to see, of course, Britain is the major power against France. All right, and at first, the second coalition is going to be successful against Napoleon, but then we're going to see that Russia is going to pull out of this war, and then ultimately the coalition is going to be defeated. But just a couple other things to know in the interim. The Battle of the Nile, which I believe we already talked about, know that even though Napoleon had his navy destroyed by England's Lord Horatio Nelson in this battle, he ends up, and he's even isolated in North Africa, he still ends up winning this War of the Second Coalition. All right, and how the war ends, the Treaty of Luneville officially ends the war, and it also breaks up the Second Coalition, so they're no longer this kind of strong group of countries against Napoleon. All right, Austria is going to lose all of its Italian possessions. The German territory on the west bank of the Rhine is going to be incorporated into France. All right, so again, if we look at this map from the previous slide, we see this region of Germany is part of France. Also, Russia, again, it's going to basically stop being involved in Western Europe because they see they see that their ambitions in the Mediterranean at this point are blocked by the British. So Russia is no longer going to be involved in Western European affairs, but eventually we're going to see Napoleon go into Russia. And again, Britain is isolated. So. Okay, after the War of the Second Coalition, we're going to have a brief period of peace between England and France. All right, and that is achieved through the Treaty of Amiens in 1802. And really what's happening is that Britain is suffering by being constantly at war with France economically, right? So they want to be able to trade with the entire continent of Europe because when they're at war with France, this really inhibits their free trade, right? So there's some territorial exchange to ensure that Britain can improve its trade relationship with the rest of Europe. So what they do is they agree to return Trinidad and all of the other Caribbean possessions it had seized from France. This was back in 1793. They took this land from France, but Britain agrees to give it back. Now France, in exchange, maintains control of Holland, the Austrian Netherlands, the west bank of the Rhine, and most of the Italian peninsula. And despite the fact that Britain gives a little bit of land back to France, we're going to see that England doesn't really expand its commerce between Britain and the continent. So basically, this treaty is a huge victory for Napoleon because Britain doesn't really get what it wants economically. And because Britain's really unsatisfied with what's going on and it's not improving its trade, we're going to see Britain actually violates the treaty technically because the island of Malta, which is in the Mediterranean, England was supposed to be giving that up to France as well, but it doesn't. It does not evacuate Malta, and eventually this is going to provoke a new war with France. All right. Also, just know that the Confederation of Switzerland, which is under Napoleon's control, he is going to reorganize this during the interim, And also, during this peace interim, realize that, of course, it's not just Europe that France and many other European countries are concerned with. They have colonies that are also playing into this conflict. All right, so this is when the Haitian Revolution takes place. All right, so Napoleon has to subdue, or he has to try at least, we know he's unsuccessful, to stop the Haitian Rebellion. All right, so in order to try to stop this, and he wants to be able to pay for all the different kind of military affairs in Europe proper. He's getting ready to go to war with England again. We're going to see that he ends up selling the Louisiana Territory to the U.S., and we know this as the Louisiana Purchase, right? So this huge, huge amount of land in the United States basically doubles the amount of land in the U.S. So the reason why Napoleon does this, well, ultimately, the purpose of the Napoleonic Wars, he's trying to conquer as much of Europe as possible. And even though, of course, this land in Louisiana is extremely valuable, he doesn't know if he can possibly have these two different empires, one in the Americas and one in Europe. So he sells Louisiana to get some money to kind of pay for strengthening the military so that he can first put down the Haitian Rebellion, which we know, Haitian Revolution that is, which we know is ultimately unsuccessful. Haiti does become independent, and also to fund the Napoleonic Wars, which we also know eventually are going to be unsuccessful. So that's the end of this section here with the Napoleonic era. We're going to talk about Napoleon's decline for next time.